Bob was going through a midlife crisis. He no longer felt like the hero he used to be. He couldn't stand his job and he was drifting away from his family. To escape his reality, he would go on adventures with a younger woman. However, what Bob learns in this story can be useful for anyone experiencing something similar. A group of criminals is on the run while Bob, dressed in a tuxedo, drives through the city, listening to a transmission about the chase. He activates a secret radar and a button that transforms his clothes into the supersuit of Mr. Incredible. His car turns into a super vehicle and speeds toward the scene, but he stops when he sees an elderly woman needing help rescuing her cat from a tree. Mr. Incredible simply uproots the tree and shakes it so the cat falls just as the criminals pass by. He then uses the trunk to smash their car. However, there's no time to celebrate as he must respond to a robbery on a tour bus and rushes back to his car. To his surprise, he finds a boy dressed as him in the passenger seat who introduces himself as Incrediboy but is actually Buddy, a persistent fan who wants to be his sidekick. Mr. Incredible ejects him from the car and then chases the thief. On top of a building, when the thief pulls out a gun, Elastigirl appears and knocks him out with her elastic arm. Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl joke about who is better at fighting crime, showing remarkable chemistry between them. Our hero ties up the villain on the side of the building to wait for the police. Meanwhile, he sees his friend Frozone, who tells him about an important event that night. At that moment, Mr. Incredible is alerted by the screams of a crowd. He rushes to the scene just in time to catch a man who was jumping from a building, crashing through a window. They land in the dark, silent Munichburg Bank. Suddenly, an explosion in one of the vaults knocks Mr. Incredible to the ground. From the smoke emerges a mime with bombs named Bomb Voyage. Before Mr. Incredible can spring into action, Incrediboy reappears. Buddy shows off his rocket boots, which he built himself, and tries to convince Mr. Incredible to accept him as a sidekick without success. Despite being rejected, Buddy insists and in an attempt to prove his worth, tries to call the police. At that moment, Bomb Voyage sticks a bomb to his cape. Mr. Incredible grabs Buddy as they fly through the city, and at the last second, he manages to get rid of the bomb. Unfortunately, the bomb explodes near the train tracks. Mr. Incredible intervenes and stops the train just in time. That night, he sends Buddy home with the police, asking them to inform his mother of his actions. Mr. Incredible says he can't stay to capture Bomb Voyage because he has an urgent commitment. Immediately after, Bob arrives at a church in his tuxedo and meets his friend Lucius, who is Frozone, at the entrance. It turns out the important event was his wedding to Helen, who is Elastigirl. Helen is upset that Bob is late, but they ultimately kiss and get married. Everything seems perfect, but it isn't. Newspapers soon report problems for Mr. Incredible, as he is sued by the man he saved from suicide, who claims Mr. Incredible shouldn't have stopped him. He is also sued by the passengers of the train he saved due to their injuries. This triggers a wave of similar lawsuits against superheroes nationwide, leading the government to create the Superhero Relocation Program, which offers amnesty to superheroes in exchange for permanently retiring and maintaining only their secret identities. 15 years later, Bob, now looking disheartened in a shirt and tie, works in an insurance office. There, he denies an elderly woman's insurance claim, even though she has full coverage, leaving her very sad. His wife, Helen, formerly Elastigirl, calls him while taking care of their baby to tell him they have finally finished unpacking despite having lived in their new home for 3 years. Bob mentions that he's with a client, and before hanging up, Helen tries to cheer him up by saying he saves the world one policy at a time. In the office, the elderly woman is distressed over the rejection of her claim. Bob, feeling guilty, gives her complex and unofficial instructions to get her claim approved. His satisfaction is short-lived as his boss, Mr. Huff, a very short man, angrily bursts into his cubicle for approving the claim, something Bob has done before. From time to time, we all reflect on what we've accomplished, who we are, and what we want in life. Often we feel that time is slipping away and that the best moments have already passed. For many, these thoughts arise during a midlife crisis. Bob is the classic example of an ordinary man facing this crisis. He finds himself at a point where he feels his life has lost meaning. His identity was so tied to being a hero that now, with that gone, he feels lost and directionless. Like many in his situation, Bob struggles to reconcile who he was with who he is now. At work, Bob feels suffocated and trapped in a monotonous routine. From his small cubicle, he deals with the frustration of following orders that go against his principles. His current job, where he has to deny insurance claims to protect company profits, is the complete opposite of his past as a superhero, where he helped people and saved lives. This job reflects his internal conflict. His current life does not reflect who he truly is. Helen goes to the elementary school principal's office because Dash, their son, has caused trouble by putting tax attacks on the teacher's chair. Though there is a video, it only shows Dash moving in his seat, revealing nothing suspicious. The principal lets Dash go without punishment, but Helen suspects her son got away with it by using his super speed. In the car, Dash suggests he'd be a better student if he could participate in sports, but Helen disagrees, reminding him that they must hide their powers and act like everyone else to blend into society. Outside of high school, Violet, a gothic-looking girl, and Bob and Helen's daughter, waits nervously. When the bell rings and she sees Tony, an attractive boy, come out, her nervousness causes her to turn invisible just as he approaches. Shortly after, Helen and Dash arrive to pick her up. At home, Bob seems depressed, focusing on the newspaper during dinner, ignoring the family conversation. Helen tries to get Dash to talk about his visit to the principal's office, but Bob only shows interest in Dash's ability to dodge the camera. After Helen scolds him for encouraging such behavior, Bob gets irritated and accidentally breaks a plate. Angry, he leaves, leaving Helen alone with the kids, who start arguing and using their superpowers. Helen is introduced to us as a protective mother and the pillar that keeps her family together. Initially, she is worried about the risks that come with superpowers and strives to offer a normal life to her family. To protect them, she has hidden her superhero identity for years and expects everyone to do the same to integrate into society and avoid trouble. However, hiding this fundamental part of their identity has had negative effects. The scoldings and restrictions lead Dash to use his powers irresponsibly. Violet's shyness and nervousness can be interpreted as a fear of rejection, as if something about her is inherently wrong. Moreover, Helen and Bob have grown distant as the parts of themselves that initially brought them together have been lost. Elsewhere, Bob discovers in the newspaper the disappearance of Simon Palladino, a superhero rights activist. Lucius, formerly Frozone, arrives and the two prepare for their usual Wednesday night bowling outing, though Helen disapproves. On the road, Lucius and Bob reminisce about their superhero days. When they hear a report about a nearby fire, they can't resist the urge to respond, saving several people from a burning building. As they try to escape, they accidentally end up in a jewelry store just as the police arrive. Lucius freezes an officer so they can get away. Unbeknownst to them, a silver-haired woman has been watching them. Bob sneaks into the house but finds Helen waiting for him on the couch, visibly upset. She reproaches him for risking the family's safety just to relive his glory days. Bob argues that it's better to relive those times than deny them. Helen responds that those days are over and that what matters now is their family, which he is neglecting. For instance, Bob refuses to attend Dash's graduation ceremony from 4th to 5th grade, arguing that if they truly want to support Dash, they should allow him to compete in sports. The argument escalates until they realize the children have overheard everything. The parents try to act normal, but it's clear there are unresolved issues. Helen spends the night on the couch. Here we see that Bob is not only unhappy at work, but also feels increasingly disconnected from his family, especially from Helen, who seems to have adjusted better to life as a mother and wife, while Bob remains distant. It's not that he doesn't love his family, but life at home in many ways feels alienating. Daily tasks seem trivial compared to his crime-fighting days. Both at work and at home, he doesn't feel as needed or valued as he did when he was a hero. He feels that his job and his family are pulling him away from his true self. Additionally, Bob's dissatisfaction with his life intensifies due to the superhero ban, which leaves him unable to envision a different future. As a result, he idealizes and clings to his days as Mr. Incredible. This creates a negative cycle where his current discontent and lack of a promising future drive him to want to be who he once was, increasing his dissatisfaction, and the cycle repeats. The next day, Bob returns to work discouraged. His boss, Mr. Huff, calls him into his office furious upon discovering that Bob has been helping clients get their claims approved. Bob defends his actions, saying they are not illegal and that they should be helping their clients, but Huff insists that their priority is the shareholders. At that moment, Bob sees a man being mugged outside and stands up to intervene, but his boss, Huff, threatens to fire him if he leaves the office. Bob holds back, but in a burst of anger, grabs Huff and hurls him through several walls, leaving him hospitalized with multiple fractures. Outside, Rick, a government agent overseeing superheroes, offers Bob assistance with relocation, but Bob refuses, determined to make his current situation work for his family. Deeply dejected, Bob returns home and heads to his office filled with memories of his glory days. As he empties his briefcase, he finds an unfamiliar tablet. When he turns it on, it scans his face and identifies him as Mr. Incredible. Then Mirage, the silver-haired woman, appears on the screen. She introduces herself as a representative of a secret government division working with experimental technology and informs him about a disaster at their facility. She offers to triple his current salary if he helps them. Bob receives a number to call within a day to give his decision. The tablet then self-destructs, activating the house's sprinklers. As he dries off, Helen tells Bob that she understands he misses being a hero and that his current job frustrates him, and she wants to thank him for his efforts for the family. Bob, somewhat nervous, tells her that his company wants him to attend an important conference out of town and that he will be gone for a few days. Helen assumes it's a promotion and is happy that Bob's skills are finally being recognized. Much of Bob's isolation stems from his inability to share his true thoughts and feelings with his family. Helen senses something is wrong, but every time she tries to talk to him, Bob avoids or distracts himself. Effective communication is key in any relationship, but men often tend to keep their true feelings to themselves, whether due to cultural norms or personal expectations. However, this silence can damage not only our own well-being, but also create an invisible barrier separating us from our loved ones. It is important for men to find a space where they feel comfortable and supported in expressing their emotions without fear of being judged or perceived as weak. Both partners must make an effort to listen and understand each other, ensuring that they can openly share their fears and hopes. This fosters a deeper, more sincere connection, which is essential in facing life's challenges together. That night, Bob contacts Mirage and decides to participate. On the plane, she explains that the Omni Droid 9000, a battle robot, is out of control on a remote island, threatening government facilities. Bob's mission is not to destroy it, but to deactivate it for future use. Upon arrival, Bob faces the Omnidroid. During the intense battle, he takes refuge in a cave and manages to trick the robot into self-destructing. Mirage and a mysterious figure observe from afar inside a volcano base on the island. The shadowy figure decides that Bob needs further testing and instructs Mirage to invite Bob to dinner. The mysterious figure does not appear, and Bob and Mirage dine alone. After returning home, Bob is a changed man, dedicating more time to his family and training to be a superhero again, which significantly improves his family life and allows them to enjoy a more luxurious lifestyle. After noticing that his superhero suit is damaged, Bob visits a mansion protected by laser fences and guards. There he meets Edna, a small woman with a distinctive accent who was once a designer for superhero suits. Although Bob wants his old suit repaired, Edna insists on making him a new one and refuses his request to add a cape, claiming it's too dangerous. Meanwhile, at home, Helen is doing laundry when she finds a silver hair on Bob's jacket. As the phone rings, Bob rushes to answer it. Suspicious, Helen listens in silence. Bob speaks with Mirage about a job the next day, leading Helen to suspect he may be having an affair. Without revealing that she heard the call, Helen approaches Bob and asks who it was. Bob mentions that it's about an upcoming conference and leaves the next day, while Helen, knowing her husband is lying, remains silent. In the middle of his crisis, Bob is presented with a temptation, a chance to escape his monotonous life and relive his glory days, even if it's in secret and under questionable conditions. For someone like Bob, trapped in his daily routine, the opportunity to be a hero again is nearly irresistible. He doesn't hesitate to accept. It's exactly what he had been searching for, an escape from monotony and a chance to reconnect with his old self. However, this is merely a form of escapism. Instead of facing his problems, he runs away from them. This escapism is dangerous because it only provides a temporary solution to issues that need to be addressed honestly and directly. Bob's way of handling his crisis is understandable, but it's not sustainable. Escapism is not without consequences. At first, Bob feels rejuvenated, returning to action, but soon his decisions begin to affect his relationship with Helen and the kids. He starts lying and hiding his activities, increasing the distance between him and his family. This is the price of escapism. In his attempt to avoid his problems, Bob ends up creating new ones that complicate his life even further. Bob travels back to the secret island. He wears his new red suit designed by Edna without a cape. Upon arrival, Mirage greets him and they take a monorail to the island's central volcano. Bob is given a room with an impressive view. At home, Helen listlessly cleans and, while organizing Bob's office, finds his recently repaired suit, recognizing Edna's stitching. Helen calls Edna, who excitedly talks about a new suit, leaving Helen confused. Determined to clarify her doubts, Helen arranges to meet with Edna. Meanwhile, Bob enters a conference room to meet his mysterious host, but the room is empty. Suddenly, a wall slides open, revealing the Omnidroid 9000. Just as the droid prepares to attack Mr. Incredible, a masked figure with orange hair appears and deactivates the robot. This character explains that he has been training the droid with other superheroes to make it a worthy opponent for Mr. Incredible. After being previously defeated, he decided to improve it. The figure then reveals himself as Buddy, the boy who once aspired to be Incrediboy at the beginning of the story. However, Buddy tells Bob that he has changed. After being rejected and seeing his dream crushed by Mr. Incredible, he decided to become dangerous to earn respect. Renamed as Syndrome, he attacks Mr. Incredible with a laser that immobilizes him and throws him near a waterfall. Before Syndrome can reach him, Mr. Incredible jumps into the water and escapes a bomb, seeking refuge in a cave where he finds the corpse of his friend Gazerbeam and a message that says Kronos. Believing he has eliminated Mr. Incredible, Syndrome departs. Let's analyze Syndrome. For Buddy, who lacked a father figure, Mr. Incredible was his hero and role model. But Buddy had no superpowers, so he tried to compensate by creating technological gadgets, hoping to earn his idol's acceptance. However, Bob rejected Buddy in a way that Buddy perceived as cold and dismissive. Instead of being welcomed and guided, Buddy was treated as a nuisance, an obstacle. At that moment, something inside him changed forever. The rejection deepened Buddy's insecurities, making him believe that his lack of powers made him insufficient. This experience left an emotional wound that not only ended his dream of being a hero, but also fueled a strong resentment toward those who had the powers he never could. From this pain, Syndrome was born. The wounded child decided that if he couldn't be accepted by the heroes, he would surpass them. He left behind the naive boy who once wanted to be a hero, and in his place, a technological genius emerged, obsessed with proving his worth through power and control. Thus, he became a villain determined to destroy superheroes and become the only one worthy of admiration. Meanwhile, Edna shows Helen the suits she designed for the entire family, including the baby. The suits have special features such as friction resistance for Dash, invisibility for Violet, and durability for Helen, as well as tracking devices. Helen is impressed but upset that Bob has returned to action despite having retired. She then calls the insurance company to locate Bob and discovers that he was fired 2 months ago. Edna then hands Helen a device to track the suits. Back on the island, Bob escapes from the cave and uses a monorail to infiltrate Syndrome's lair, cleverly evading guards and obstacles. Upon reaching a control room with a massive computer, he enters the password Kronos, which grants him access to a list called Supers, where he learns that many superheroes have been eliminated on the island, contributing to the improvement of the Omnidroid's design. Bob also discovers that his supposed death contributed to the final development of the Omnidroid, which is programmed to destroy a city in 8 hours. Helen activates the tracker and locates Bob on a Pacific island. This triggers an alarm in Mr. Incredible's supersuit, attracting security, which immobilizes him with a sticky black substance. Meanwhile, Helen cries in Edna's kitchen, believing that Bob is cheating on her. Edna motivates her to act like Elastigirl and reclaim her husband. The emerging issues with her children and the growing disconnect with Bob forced Helen to reconsider her stance on their superpowers. She realized that denying her true identity, as well as that of her family, was not the solution, and this realization led her to want to reclaim that part of herself. Determined, Helen leaves Violet in charge of the kids and sets off for the island. The children, excited, put on their new suits while Helen is distracted. On the plane, Helen tries to communicate with the control tower without success and changes into her Elastigirl suit. Meanwhile, a captured Bob watches as Syndrome shows him a video of Helen calling the tower, increasing his concern. Suddenly, Helen discovers that Violet and Dash have stowed away on the plane. The siblings argue and mention that Jack is with the babysitter Carrie. Helen, with no time to argue, evades missiles directed at them. Despite Violet's efforts to shield the plane with a force field, she fails, and Helen turns herself into a parachute to protect the children from the impact. They land in the water and survive, though unsure of what to do next. Bob, believing his family has died upon hearing the events over the radio, attempts to attack Syndrome but ends up capturing Mirage, whom he threatens but later releases. Meanwhile, Helen follows the missile trail to locate the island and transforms into a boat with Dash as the motor. On the beach, they find a cave and start a fire. Helen hands the children their masks and instructs them to stay behind while she searches for Bob, telling them to use their powers if necessary. Violet follows Helen, apologizing for failing to protect the plane. Helen comforts her, assuring her that she is more powerful than she thinks and that she will know what to do when the time comes. Here, Helen's transformation is evident. She now allows her children to use their powers, demonstrating her trust and acceptance of them. This change is crucial because it marks her transition from excessive protection to a healthy confidence in her children's abilities and decisions. This attitude helps the children gain self-confidence, develop their skills, and learn to control them. Helen has recognized that their superpowers are an essential part of who they are and that when managed responsibly and together, they can do a lot of good. In the base, Mirage, furious that Syndrome nearly let her die, leaves in anger. Meanwhile, Helen grabs onto a monorail with her elastic arm to reach the base. As she infiltrates, She gets trapped in a set of doors while trying to dodge two guards, whom she quickly neutralizes using her elastic limbs. More soldiers attempt to stop her, but she defeats them with her flexibility and combat skills. In the cave, while Violet struggles to create force fields, Dash explores and discovers that the cave leads to Syndrome's base. At that moment, Syndrome launches his rocket. Dash sees the flames and runs to find Violet. They escape the cave just as the rocket takes off. In space, the rocket releases a jet headed toward the city. Helen, now in the control center, finds a high-energy cell where Bob is likely being held. The next morning, the incredible children wake up in a jungle. Dash hears a robotic voice asking for a bird identification code, which turns out to be an alarm. When it activates, the children flee as Syndrome's henchmen approach. Inside the base, Mirage enters Bob's cell and deactivates the controls, freeing him. As she approaches, he grabs her, thinking she is there to harm him, but she reveals that his family is alive. Relieved, he hugs her just as Helen arrives and, misinterpreting the situation, punches Mirage. Bob quickly clarifies that Mirage was helping him escape and kisses Helen, assuring her that he could never betray the perfect woman. Meanwhile, the children use their powers to try to escape. Violet turns invisible and Dash runs so fast that he even manages to sprint across water after being thrown from an enemy ship. Suddenly, a guard aims at them, and just as he is about to fire, Violet creates a force field to protect them, and Dash uses it as a sphere to move quickly. Finally, the siblings reunite with their parents, but before they can celebrate, Syndrome immobilizes them with a paralysis ray and traps them in his base. There, he shows them how his Omnidroid is attacking the city and reveals his plan to intervene as the hero at the last moment without admitting that he created the robot himself. Returning to Syndrome, his methods reflect his insecurities. He never faced superheroes directly, but instead used the Omnidroid. His tactic of pretending to defeat the Omnidroid follows the same pattern. This makes me think that what Buddy truly sought, perhaps unconsciously, was not to be a superhero, but to gain validation and acceptance. Since childhood, he saw that superheroes received this, and that's why he wanted to be like them. Not out of true conviction, but to fill the void left in his childhood. For him, the most important thing was never to be a superhero, but to be recognized, which is why he is now willing to use deception and cause destruction to achieve it. Given all this, the name syndrome takes on a deep meaning. A syndrome is a set of symptoms that characterize a disease or condition. Therefore, the character syndrome can be seen as a combination of various emotional and psychological symptoms of Buddy, such as rejection, resentment, and an intense need for recognition, which merge to form the villain. What's tragic about Syndrome is that deep down, he wasn't born a villain. He started as a child full of dreams and admiration, but rejection and lack of guidance led him down a dark path. His story shows how emotional wounds, if not faced and healed, can become something much more destructive, an obsession that consumes everything a person is, leading them down a path that ultimately brings only pain and loneliness. At its core, Syndrome reflects the internal struggles we all face at some point in our lives, and his tragic story serves as a warning about the dangers of letting our insecurities and resentments define who we are. Back in the city, the Omnidroid battles military forces while Bob blames himself and considers himself a bad father. He admits that his obsession with feeling undervalued prevented him from appreciating what he had. Just then, Violet manages to free the family, and they head to a hangar to take a rocket with Mirage's help. The confrontation with Syndrome was the key moment that forced Bob to face the consequences of his actions and realize what truly matters. Until then, he saw his return to hero life as a way to feel useful and valued, but seeing that his decisions put his family in danger, he understood that his nostalgia came at a high cost. This was a painful but necessary moment because it allowed him to reconsider his priorities and identity. Now, Bob realizes that his worth didn't lie in reliving his superhero days, but in his ability to take care of his family in the present. He understands that his family was not a burden pulling him away from his true self, but the key to finding the purpose he had been searching for. Bob now understands that the solution to his crisis was not to escape his current life, but to learn to live it differently. That true fulfillment was not about fleeing to the past, but about being fully present for the people he loves. That's why he starts valuing his family more and finally overcomes the nostalgia that held him back. Meanwhile, Lucius searches for his supersuit but discovers it has disappeared. His wife warns him not to try to be a hero while he desperately searches. Outside, the Omnidroid destroys the city and Syndrome pretends to fight it but is actually deactivating its defenses with a device on his wrist. The situation escalates when the Omnidroid becomes more intelligent, rips the wrist controller from Syndrome and leaves him helpless, allowing the robot to run wild. The Incredibles arrive in the city. Bob tries to face the Omnidroid alone, but Helen insists that he needs help. Bob admits his fear of losing her and they share a passionate kiss, interrupted when the Omnidroid destroys their vehicle. Violet protects her brother with her force field but is left unconscious from the effort. The encounter with Syndrome also showed Bob that he couldn't solve everything alone. For a long time, he thought his worth as a hero depended on facing challenges alone. However, by fighting alongside his family, he realizes that he doesn't need to carry this burden by himself. This change not only benefits him, but also improves his relationship with them. By fighting together, they become closer than ever. Their bond strengthens, overcoming the barriers that had emotionally separated them. Mr. Incredible distracts the robot while Helen and the children seek refuge. During the battle, Frozone joins in and the fight intensifies. Seeing Syndrome's remote control, Mr. Incredible uses it to disable one of the Omnidroid's arms. He then throws the controller to Dash, who despite the robot's attacks, catches it but later drops it. Violet tries to use it without success until Bob comes up with the idea to use the Omnidroid's own weapons against itself. With Helen's help, he launches the disabled claw into the robot's core, completely destroying it to the applause of the citizens. Meanwhile, an enraged Syndrome watches from a rooftop. In a black car, Agent Rick informs the family that the government has frozen all of Syndrome's assets and that their future as public superheroes remains uncertain. Helen hears concerning messages from the babysitter, surprised by her gratitude toward a replacement they never sent. Upon entering the house, they discover Jack-Jack in Syndrome's hands, who attacks them with a paralysis ray. Syndrome attempts to take Jack-Jack to his ship, proclaiming that he will be his new sidekick. As he approaches, Jack-Jack transforms into a ball of fire, then into metal, and finally into a demon, causing Syndrome to drop him. Bob catapults Helen toward the baby, and she gently brings him down with her body. From his jet, Syndrome mocks them until Bob hurls a car at him, eliminating him. The remains of the plane fall toward the family, but Violet shields them with her force field. 3 months later, Dash prepares for a race. Violet talks to Tony, the attractive boy, who invites her to the movies. Dash decides to finish in second place, knowing he could easily win. As they leave, the ground cracks open, revealing a giant drill from which the Underminer emerges, starting to make threats. But the family, already wearing their masks, is ready to face him. In the end, each family member learned to embrace all aspects of themselves, developing a more complete and authentic identity. However, I want to highlight Bob's journey in particular. At the beginning, Bob felt that his superhero identity conflicted with his family life, but by the end, he learned to integrate these two parts of his life. He stopped feeling like he had to choose between being a hero and being a good father. He realized he could be both as long as he kept his priorities clear and didn't lose sight of what truly mattered. Bob discovered that his value was not limited to his past, but that he could find new ways to contribute and be valuable. This resonates with us because it reminds us that we can all reinvent ourselves and find purpose in every stage of our lives. Ultimately, Bob's story is about the internal struggle many people face when they reach a point in their lives where they feel disconnected from who they used to be and what once gave them purpose. But what makes his story so special is how, in the end, he found a new way to be a hero in his present life by being a guide and support for his family. He learned that true heroism does not rest in great feats or public recognition, but in his dedication, love, and commitment to the most important people in his life. Being a good father and husband is just as heroic as any other accomplishment.